Welcome to my channel, Ongoya the lawyer. My name is Ongoya, and today we are going to be speaking about constitutional matters. Just recently, our constitution turned 10 years, and you've been seeing there have been a lot of talks about changing our constitution. What do you think? Do we really need a new constitution? Do we need constitutional amendments? So join us in our discussion today. Hope you enjoy. Like, share, and subscribe. Joining me today is a luminary scholar, my teacher of the law, and my former dean at Kabarak, Mr. Elisha Zebedee Ongoya. Thank you, Alimu, for agreeing to host this channel today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so our constitution just turned 10 years this year, and we are seeing that there are a lot of talks about changing the constitution, about constitutional amendments and a referendum. So what can you say is the status of the implementation of the constitution currently?
The nature of a constitutional document from the name is that it constitutes the state. It's the basic framework around which the state is founded and the state operates. Implementation of the constitution is not a time-bound experiment.
Yes.
Implementation of the constitution is an enduring course. It's a lifelong course, surviving for as long as the state survives. And therefore, once we understand it from that context, we will be patient with the pace of implementation of the constitution, because there will be no single time when it will be said we have finished implementing the constitution. It will continuously guide us in terms of the framework of governance of our country. However, there are aspects of the constitution that by now ought to have been given effect to, that have not been given effect to, even in that continuing sense of the word. And that is the sad part of this tale. So that if you look at the ethical fabric of the Kenyan society, it's a depressing state of affairs. The constitution, on the other hand, expects a strong ethical fabric in terms of its textual prescription. So those are the aspects that raise legitimate concerns, not because we haven't finished implementing them, rather because we haven't begun implementing them, which we ought to have started by now. Yes.
Yeah, I truly agree with that, because if we look at Article 261 and the 5th schedule, there were timelines for certain laws to be implemented, of which some have already come into force. But something that has brought a lot of debate is actually the third gender rule, which has been back and forth even to the courts at the Supreme Court for interpretation. So what are your thoughts on that?
I take pride in the fact that I litigated more than 50% of the cases that sought, in terms of the objective, to cause an practical implementation of the 2/3 gender rule as spelled out in Article 27, 6 and 8 of the Constitution and Article 81 of the Constitution. I take significant pride in that. And as we speak today, there is an affirmative order by the High Court Justice Mativo directing Parliament to enact a legislation to give effect to that rule, and failing which, giving liberty to any person to petition the Chief Justice to advise the President to dissolve Parliament. Unfortunately, that is a decision that has only been honored in breach. The only respect we have given it is by breaching it, which is a tragedy of monumental proportions. And that's critical. The other aspects are areas where, in the course of enacting legislation under the 5th schedule, Parliament took to a course of enacting legislation that watered down the original expectation of the Constitution. So that if you look at statutes like the Leadership and Integrity Act that are supposed to give life to the provisions of Chapter 6 of the Constitution, you do not see a lot of teeth in that statute. For example, there are provisions for wealth declarations that must remain private throughout, no one can access them, among other provisions, self-declarations that do not provide for coercive mechanisms of intrusively seeing what public sector operatives are doing with their sources of income, and particularly the illicit ones. So those are challenges that remain with us, and which tells us that a constitutional text in and of itself may not be very beneficial, not just to Kenya, but to any society, in the absence of a marching culture of constitutionalism, a marching, if you may, spiritual desire by those governed by that constitution to see to it that the real life on the ground in that society corresponds to the textual expectation of that constitution. That is the real crisis in Kenya.
That is true. And maybe what could you say are the challenges in terms of implementation of the Constitution?
There are what I may call specific nuances of the challenges that are many and diverse. But in summary, the implementation of the Kenyan Constitution suffers three challenges. Challenge number one is absence of political goodwill. Challenge number two is absence of vigilance of the people. Challenge number three is a culture of bad manners. If you address these challenges, everything else will fall into place.
Don't you also think about litigation? I mean, there's been so much litigation on the interpretation of the Constitution. What would you say about that?
Sokola, I gave you an example a short while ago that I take pride in litigating a cause that culminated into a positive order, directing Parliament, for example, to enact a statute within a particular time frame, failing which particular resultant steps were to be taken to culminate into the demise of the term of Parliament. There can be nothing more practical and more threatening to a people who have a sense of shame and a sense of collective public interplay than that. As we speak today, that has not been given effect to. So I do not want to discourage litigation strategy. It remains one of the few weapons in our arsenal and must continuously use it. But in the absence of the three aspects I talked about, political will, people's vigilance, and a marching culture of good manners, that strategy will itself most likely come to naught. It has previously come to naught, and I've no doubt in my mind. I mean, think about it. Not long ago, the Senate gave an advisory opinion in course number 3 of 2019, directing that if there's an impasse in Senate or between the Houses of Parliament on revenue allocation to counties, the counties should receive 50% of the revenue they received in the previous financial year as the impasse is being resolved. This is towards the end of the month of September. The financial year began towards the end of the month of June. 2.5 months down the line, counties have not received any money in spite of that advisory opinion. That tells you litigation can have its own paper effect. But in the absence of matching culture of good manners, people who can be ashamed of doing wrong things blatantly, you are highly unlikely to realize the desired effects of the Constitution, at least within the desired time frames.
Okay, so in light of the challenges that you've pointed out, what will be your recommendations in implementing some of the remaining aspects of the Constitution?
The Constitution remains to be implemented in full, because even what we perceive to be implemented aspects of the Constitution is a continuing concern. It's a going concern. My recommendation is that, one, there is need for introspection among all the people of Kenya, and the people of Kenya need to introspect on aspects such as what is the impact of the current state of the rule of law on all aspects of our lives, be they social, economic, political. Think about it. Every time we approach elections in this country, it is a tense moment.
Yeah.
It's a tense moment because we associate elections with violence and tension and breach of law and order and everything that is negative. And yet, elections were fashioned as an instrument in the constitution for good governance.
Yeah.
There's no harmony between good governance and the kind of tension, the kind of violence, the kind of atmosphere you see in this country ahead of elections. That is because we are performing poorly on the rule of law index. Because of the poor rule of law index, we have impunity. Impunity manifests itself in many aspects. Key among them is corruption.
Yeah.
Because of corruption, there is no opportunity for young people. They are unemployed, they are despondent, they are hopeless, so to speak. They have no sense of hope. A society whose young people have no sense of hope is a society in danger. In light of all this, I think the starting point is introspection among the people of Kenya. When people introspect, they ought to have what I describe elsewhere as enlightened self-interest.
Yeah.
Enlightened self-interest is where you defer today's gratification for purposes of enjoying your tomorrow, as opposed to saying, I want to gratify myself today and care less about tomorrow. If we did that, chances are that our policymakers, ourselves as a people as a whole, will behave differently. And we'll bribe policemen less on the roads, we'll bribe judicial officers less or nil, we will use public resources better and more efficiently, we'll spend less on public projects than multiplying the cost to fill in the cost of corruption. So these are things that I think require introspection. If we introspect as citizens, we will then act better as people with political power. We will give more political will. We will act better as citizens who are supposed to be on the lookout to hold people to account. We will have more vigilance of the people. And more importantly for me, we will demonstrate a greater sense of good manners when it comes to our day-to-day interactions. We will be citizens in the original sense of the word. Citizens in the original Greek mythology was not every person. It was only good-mannered people. The rest of the people who are ill-mannered, who didn't accord to the dictates of good manners, were actually described as idiots. My problem is the level of idiocy in this country far supersedes the level of citizenry in this country. Yes.
I agree. And if you look at the BBI, there was a part that was talking about having a difference in the national ethos. But now I'd like to bring in some of the recommendations about having a prime minister. Does that really involve constitutional amendments or a referendum per se?
Unfortunately, from where I stand, the BBI stands to solve zero of Kenya's problems.
Okay.
The problems of Kenya are isolated by three. Political goodwill. Now, you don't need BBI to have political goodwill. Vigilance of the people. You don't need BBI to have vigilance of the people. And a matching good manners culture. You don't need BBI to have good manners. You need more personal and collective resolves among those who wield power and among those who stand as subjects, who are supposed to hold power to account to realize the dreams of the new constitution. I have read and reread the BBI report. I have not seen any single item in that report that I can say is so novel in prescription that it cannot be addressed within the existing framework of the Constitution of Kenya.
Wow.
And therefore, I think the thing that Kenyans require does not necessarily require constitutional reforms. I'm not saying the Constitution is a perfect document, but the challenges facing Kenya today are not a consequence of the imperfections in the Constitution. They are a consequence of factors outside the imperfections of the Constitution. Medical scientists will agree with me. If the diagnosis is wrong, the outcomes are going to be tragic. BBI is one of the misdiagnoses. The consequences are going to be tragic.
Okay. I agree with you in that, though maybe some people will differ, because I mean it's a game of interest in politics. But us as scholars, we just say things as it is.
Those who may differ by way of opinion, and I respect that. As a constitutionalist, I'll be the last person to disrespect divergent opinions. I, for instance, do not see how introduction of one more office, the office of a prime minister, which, by the way, this country has had twice in its history. Jomo Kenyatta was once a prime minister. Raila Odinga was once a prime minister. I don't see how the reintroduction of that office will be the magic wand that will solve the many problems this country has had. Jomo Kenyatta was prime minister. This country suffered problems of corruption, suffered problems of land grabbing, suffered problems of youth unemployment, suffered problems of illiteracy, lack of healthcare services, poor transport network. Raila Odinga was prime minister. Scandals were still. So the question is that the existence of that office in and of itself doesn't solve a problem. These problems need to be solved by the three core ingredients. My fear is I did not see somebody telling us to experiment with those three ingredients for a particular period of time before we try something else. That's what I'm calling a misdiagnosis. The results will be tragic.
But don't you think concentrating power to the executive is also one of the reasons that we're experiencing the high rate of corruption in Kenya?
Unfortunately, for that concern, this constitution has dispersed power. The executive is just one of the areas where power is vested in this constitution. There is judicial power that is vested in the judiciary. There is legislative power and other powers vested in parliament, by which I mean the National Assembly and the Senate. There is power vested in county assemblies. There is power vested in county executives. There is power vested in county public service boards. There is power vested in county assembly service boards. There is power vested in independent offices like the office of the Auditor General and the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. There is power vested in the multiplicity of constitutional commissions set out in Chapter 15 of the Commission. How clearer can we be in dispersing power? Are we saying that that is not dispersal enough? Which is why I say, once we sit back and reflect on just what this constitution offers us, we can achieve quite a bit if we try to give it effect. And if we can't achieve much with what it offers us, chances of achieving much with anything else is close to a miracle.
I agree with you on that, but also, what I'm going to talk about is to be talked about in another forum, but I'm thinking about changing the electoral system. Does that require a referendum also, or constitutional amendments?
Now, to an extent, there are aspects of the electoral system that to change them you must go to a referendum. Because, for example, the manner in which we disperse power to various electoral offices and the manner in which elections are conducted may impact some constitutional commissions like the IEBC. So that those are aspects that one needs to study very carefully, because if you look at the Article 255 of the Constitution, so long as the amendment touches on any of those aspects set out in Article 255, for example, the manner in which the IEBC operates, then that would require a referendum, because that is a commission in the meaning of chapter 15. So that may be so. But again, let me put it this way. The electoral system is not the cause of our problems. The electoral system has no bearing on our manners. Manners exist inherently in us, regardless of the electoral system. We can run this country well with our current electoral system if we were minded to be good-mannered. We can run this country hopelessly with a different electoral system if we retain our current manners. So to the extent that the problem requires changes of heart, then again, a reflection on changes in the electoral system will just pass for what I've called before a misdiagnosis. I'm not saying we have a perfect electoral system, but quite carefully, we have a fairly sensible electoral system in terms of just the legal prescriptions. Go to Article 81 and look at the core principles governing our electoral system. elections must be transparent, must be free, must be fair, must be by secret ballot. The electoral system is supposed to culminate into gender diversity, inclusion of the marginalized, inclusion of the youth, inclusion of women, name them. What are we saying? We want to add this one thing that if somebody reflected on it and added it, is going to change things dramatically. We can tweak a few things here and there as a question of efficiency in the management of the process. But just think about it. Even look at our electoral laws and rules. You have to cast a ballot in a polling station. A polling station should not have more than 700 people. The votes must be counted there in the polling station to deal with any form of manipulation. The results must be announced there. The officials must sign them. The candidates and their agents must sign them. You must post a copy of the results on the door in that particular place. How clearer can the law get? I say, and I repeat without fear of contradiction, our problems are beyond our legal framework. Our insistence on the legal framework borders on belief in witchcraft, on belief that by touching this magic wound, something radical, magical will happen. It doesn't work like that. Societies that have improved their systems elsewhere have introspected and dealt with their mannerisms and gravitated towards good manners, gravitated towards citizenry in the original Greek sense of the word, and walked away from idiocy. We insist on living in idiocy and hoping that changes in law will itself remove idiocy. It doesn't work like that.
I think you've made me think about a subject in jurisprudence, whether the law can really regulate morality.
Yes.
But then we are saying it really can't. It's just about people, as you say, introspecting and reflecting on what really should happen in Kenya. Okay, thank you for that, Mwalimu. And now, even as we're thinking about introspection, how can we be able to balance the constitution as a legal instrument, as a political instrument, as an instrument for social change?
Fortunately, historically, our constitution, like any other constitution in the world, is a negotiated instrument. It is therefore an amalgam of compromises. That when you have different interests negotiating, for them to reach any consensus, there is bound to be a give and take, what I call a compromise. Such document will have a lot of abeyances. A lot of things will be left in a language that is vague as a way of accommodating the compromises. Fortunately for us, our constitution then has inbuilt mechanisms for resolving those silences and abeyances and vagueness of language. That is through the tool called interpretation. So our constitution has also come up with institutions that will interpret and apply it. Key among this is the judiciary, but it's not the sole interpreter. The constitution is interpreted in many forums outside the judiciary. Let me give you an example. Speakers of the various houses of parliament constantly interpret the constitution through their rulings and through their directions and through their management of the affairs of their houses. Policemen interpret the constitution. A policeman on the street has to make out a decision whether to arrest or not. He's engaged in an Article 49 question in his mind. He has to engage in a mental decision on how much force to apply in the course of arresting a particular person. That's an Article 49 question of the Constitution. The point I'm just making is that the Constitution then has given us multiple forums where it has to be interpreted. It has given us in Article 49 the guiding principles of interpretation. Somebody must ask himself, is the meaning, is the effect I am giving to the Constitution the one that is likely to lead to good governance? The one that's likely to lead to the rule of law? The one that's likely to lead to optimum enjoyment of the Bill of Rights, among others. So it is a fully fitted Constitution with institutions and the operational framework of those institutions. And that to me supplies the answer to the question, how then do we manage the aspects that are legal and the aspects that are social? Allow me to tell your viewers this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most frequently used terms in our constitution is the phrase social justice.
Okay.
You'll find that phrase from the preamble all the way. You read it multiple times.
Okay.
I dare say, I don't think there's any phrase that is used in the constitution more than the phrase social justice.
Okay.
And that tells you the constitution anticipated the framework of justice, but not in the technical legal sense of the word.
Okay.
It anticipated exactly that balancing you're talking about, where there is justice that is in the social sense. The average man and woman in the slums, in the hamlets, in the serene areas feel a sense of well treated by their society. The question we must constantly ask is, have we delivered that expectation of the Constitution? I can say without further contradiction, we have not.
Yes.
It is not the absence of BBI that is preventing us from doing it. It is because we have not had the will to do it. Those who steal money meant to offer medical care to the sick are defeating social justice, because health is a socio-economic right, and delivery of health is delivering social justice. Those who steal money that is meant for upgrading of slums are delivering a blow to social justice, because they are taking away resources that are meant to guarantee housing, which is a socio-economic right. If we delivered housing, we would have fostered social justice, among others. But once we look at social justice for what it is, which is the most dominantly used word in the Constitution, we'll see that ours is one of those constitutions that anticipated a delicate balance between the instrument as a legal instrument and the instrument as a social guarantor of social equity and social justice.
Yeah, I highly agree with you, because you're supposed to balance all the interests of the elites and the non-elites. And if you look at the constitution, elites really refer to the ones who are ruling, and the non-elites refer to the ones being ruled. I hope to the viewers that's clear, because I mean people have different perceptions on what the elite means. Then there's also another question I've been pondering about. Is the Kenyan constitution a procedural constitution or a prescriptive constitution?
Allow me to answer this question in a fairly general sense, in the sense that the various typologies of constitution are not meant to be exclusive pigeonholes. A single constitution can carry aspects of each of the typologies of constitutions. A good example is one, the Kenyan constitution is a written constitution. It's written. That is as contradistinguished from an unwritten constitution like the UK type. It's also a republican constitution as opposed to a monarchical constitution. It's also a democratic constitution as opposed to a dictatorial or tyrannical constitution. To an extent, one looks at it as gravitating towards a federal one because of the entrenched chapters on devolution, although Kenya remains a unitary state. So you see the same document fitting the multiple pigeonholes of typologies of constitutions. Now that's number one. Number two, the Kenyan constitution, like any other constitution, deals with the question of power. It is a power map. We can design multiple contours. It identifies institutions, vests functions in those institutions, and gives powers for the delivery of those functions in those institutions. But again, it is also relatively prescriptive. You see a very detailed constitution, again for historical reasons. That is one of the homegrown aspects of the Constitution of Kenya. It was designed to minimize the incident of discretion, because ahead of this constitution was another constitution that had a larger incident of discretion, but that discretion was highly abused. So the natural reaction was for people to make one that minimizes the incident of discretion. So to an extent, one may look at it as a fairly prescriptive constitution, but it's also what we call a transformative constitution. Transformative constitutions are strong on values. They don't just distribute power. They distribute power accompanied by values. So if you look at Article 10 of our Constitution, it sets out the national values and principles of governance. If you look at Article 81 of the Constitution, it spells out the principles of our electoral system, which is the values that those who manage elections and those who participate in elections must internalize. Look at Article 232 of the Constitution. It says about the values of public service, which means you're not just serving in public service as a power question. That power is exercised and exercisable subject to a certain value content spelled out in Article 232. So to that extent, one may look at it as a prescriptive constitution. I'm saying this to emphasize the fact that it picks from multiple aspects of typologies of constitution, possibly to be able to give us its best. Unfortunately, it may give its best to the not so best a people who subscribe to doctrines of idiocy, and the problem is you may not then achieve the objective best of the constitution.
Yeah, I love how you're using the word idiocy. Some people will be offended.
Yes, actually the offense is desired. The word is used to achieve actually an offensive effect, because one of the challenges this country has had is absence of introspection. And unless you begin asking that maybe I'm in fact an idiot, you will never change. It's important that people understand that, but I mean, let's face it, why are Kenyans idiots? They're idiots because they're tribalists. Kenyans are tribalists. When you're a tribalist, you're an idiot. Tribalism is a base emotion. Base emotion is a core resource for idiots. Enlightened people with an enlightened self-interest cannot afford to be tribalists. They will see beyond the tribe. They will see the vision of the constitution for humanity, for a people who value social justice, who value equity, who value equality of all human beings by virtue of their being human, regardless of their history, their social status, their geography. That is not what I experience every day in this country. I see people who are so conscious of tribe, and therefore those people deserve to be irritated by constantly being referred to as idiots.
Okay, and as I think there's something in the BBI that was talking about changing the software, not the hardware.
Yes.
And I mean, it's running through the conversation that it's introspection, not really changing the systems, because we have systems that are working, but the people running them are so tribal, as you said, and they are just safeguarding their interests. I mean, it's all over. And
if you listen to a conversation in Senate yesterday, when Senate adjourned to discuss a statement that had been issued by the chair of the Council of Governors to all county governors as a reaction to the failure by Senate to build consensus on the formula for division of revenue, there was consensus among all senators that all governors are thieves. They say it so expressly. Now you can imagine living in a country where the officials actually know that they are all thieves. They know that, and they speak about it openly without shame. There's a problem there.
Yeah, there is.
There's no one who is resigning for being a thief. There's no one among the governors who is in jail for being a thief. How do you deal with that? Those are not things that the law can solve. Because you can imagine a country where the law is supposed to solve a problem of criminality and everybody is a criminal. It can't work. There must be a presumption of the law that these people are civil, but that a few among them may be wrongdoers, so that you focus on the few. If you told the local policeman to arrest everybody, he has no cells to accommodate them. If you told the courts to try everybody, including the judicial officers themselves, that's a complex situation. If you told prisons to accommodate everybody, then there's a problem. So that's the kind of scenario we are dealing with, that we're saying, no, we cannot resolve the challenge this country faces with conventional approaches to law. And the theme that BBI talks about, which is the software, the national ethos, is what we talk about the culture of bad manners. And we need to be able to do that, to ask ourselves, as a teacher of the law, am I doing my best in my space? As a student, am I doing my best in my space? As a media practitioner, am I doing my best in my space? As a medical doctor, am I doing my best in my space? Once we begin introspection at that level, there are better chances we are going to achieve the expectations of this constitution. To the extent that we stop reflecting on that, and focus on the next amendment to the Constitution, the next amendment to the Public Procurement and Disposal Act, the next amendment to the Elections Act, it's a wrong prescription. The results will be tragic. The patient will die.
Yeah, I highly agree with that, because I mean, we've had so many amendments, but you're not seeing changes, you know.
Yes.
And I mean, the cancer scandal, people are now pointing fingers at each other. Well, even sometimes I'm asking myself, okay, I know there was corona, but really, did you need that much money
to deal with the crisis?
Yeah.
I want your viewers to just take a copy of their constitution and read that Article 43 and ask themselves, what more promise will an amendment to the Constitution? It says every Kenyan is entitled to adequate food of acceptable quality. These are basic things. Adequate food of acceptable quality, to safe and adequate drinking water, to health, including healthcare services, to social security. How better can it get? I think the Constitution has offered us the best it can offer us. The law has taken us the farthest law can take anyone. We must now go into what is now called the software issue. The law cannot make provision of the software issue. The software issue is purely a manners issue. Kenyans must wake up one day and put the past behind them and be of good manners. They will walk into the kingdom of plenty.
Yeah, true. I almost say the kingdom of God. You know, in Kabarak we used to do everything in biblical perspective.
Yes. A very important philosophy, if it's not my opinion.
Yes. Yeah, so what are your final thoughts moving forward, and what people should focus on in the current constitution? Yes.
Let me put it this way. The country has a good constitution. Make no mistake about it. If you look at all scholarly and other political discourses on the question of Kenya, there is consensus. It is a progressive constitution. It is a futuristic constitution. It is a transformative constitution. Those are very good attributes. We must give effect to it. To give effect to it, every person must do what they have got to do in their own little way. There's a book done by a former American First Lady called Michelle Obama, where he reflects on how change is achieved. And change is not achieved by grandiose acts. Change is achieved by little people doing little positive things in their little spaces. Cumulatively, the change that those people will achieve is phenomenal. The danger is if those people stop doing the little good things or outrightly begin doing little bad things. The cumulative effect of the bad things is unimaginable. I want every Kenyan of goodwill to reflect on the works of Lee Kuan Yew, not a democrat himself, but how he transformed Singapore from third world to the first. They will understand that an individual in his or her lifetime can make a difference, but it takes on a mental reorientation. First, to perceive yourself as important and dignified and capable of making change. Then a self-dispatch, to dispatch yourself as an individual to make that difference. And more critically for me, to stop the little bad manners. Just don't give a policeman a bribe on the road. Don't cheat in the exams as a student. Don't miss your session as a law lecturer or as a lecturer in the classroom as a teacher. Don't, just avoid those bad things. The cumulative effect of this behavior is phenomenal, and this country will take off. Others have done it. It can be done. It must be done. And who has to do it? It is you and me in our individual and collective senses of the word. Yes.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
I was honored to have you.
Asante.
And I've just remembered a right moment when in first year I called one of my male class reps. A woman that was reported to you.
Yes, I remember that episode when I was new in office. It happens. Yes.
Yeah, but thank you so much.
Asante sana.
Yeah.
It's a great pleasure. Asante.